This is Shilpa, Assistant Professor, Dept. of Forensic Science, Ajkcas College of Arts and Sciences. So, in today's session, we'll be discussing the first unit of forensic dermatoglyphics, that is Introduction to Fingerprint. So, we'll be covering the topics such as introduction, histories of fingerprint, formation of fingerprint ridges, importance of forensic fingerprint, types of fingerprints, classification of fingerprint patterns, and automated fingerprint identification system, that is AFIS. So before knowing what fingerprint is, we'll have to know what is forensic dermatoglyphics. So forensic dermatoglyphics is the study of rich patterns which is present in the skin. So that includes fingerprints, palm prints, lip prints, ear prints, as well as your footprints. Okay. So fingerprints are nothing but the prints which are being left out by your fingers on a surface. So this deposition is due to the sweat residues which is present in your fingers. Okay, so the fingerprints are basically formed by ridges and furrows. Okay, ridges are the corrugated lines which is present on the raised portions of your finger, and the hollow portions which is left behind is called as furrow or valley. So ridges and furrows togetherly form a curved pattern on your fingertip which is called as fingerprints. So this study of examination of fingerprinting is called as forensic dermatoscopy. Okay, which has been derived from a Greek word where dermato means skin and scopy means matching the prints. Okay, so fingerprint is one of the important evidence in our criminal justice system because fingerprints is very unique and very identical to each individual. It is said that even identical twins whose DNA is similar will not have same fingerprint. Okay, so to know who found the fingerprint first and how the development of the fingerprint has occurred, we have to know the history of fingerprint. So it was 6,000 years ago where the Chinese, in one of the archaeological sites, during the examination, they found a pottery in which fingerprints was present. So this print is established as the oldest fingerprint till now. So it was the Chinese, and in Asia during the 80s and BDs the fingerprints were used for identification purpose, and even in India the royal kingdoms used fingerprint for trying treaties between the royal kingdoms. So later during the 17th, 18th, 19th and 20th centuries the Europeans started studying fingerprints. So it was first the T.C. Mayer who was the first person to say that fingerprint is very unique. So he, in one of his book where he used to study about the anatomy of the human body, so in that book he mentioned the fingerprint is unique. Then comes Henry. Henry was the first person who told persistence of fingerprint. Okay, so Henry was the first person to study the persistence of fingerprint. Then comes William Herschel. William Herschel, he was the Governor General of Bengal, who later wrote first article on fingerprint, and he also said that fingerprint can be used for individualization and as an evidence in the court of law. Then comes Alphonse Bertillon. So he was the first person who used body measurement and photographs for identification of criminals. So the fingerprint classification system which is currently followed is the advanced version of Bertillon's classification. That is, he used identification of individual, that is criminal, using body measurement as well as photographs, and this study was called as anthropometry. Then comes Sir Francis Galton. So Francis Galton is called as the father of fingerprint. So because he was the first person to write a book on fingerprinting, the classification of fingerprinting and minutiae, that is the important element which helps in comparing to fingerprint, was discovered by Sir Francis Galton, and the rich characteristics is also called as Galton's detail because it was found by Galton. So hence he is called as the father of forensic fingerprinting. This is the history of fingerprint. So next we will see how the ridges are formed. So basically ridges are formed on the surface of our skin. So as we all know, the skin is one of the largest organ which is present in our human body, which is spread out throughout our body. So the skin is basically made up of three layers: epidermis, dermis as well as hypodermis. Epidermis is the uppermost layer of the skin, dermis is the middle layer, and hypodermis is the third layer. So these three layers are joined together by hypodermis, that is the fibrous connective tissue which is present in your hypodermis. So these tissues have also has sweat pores. Okay, so sweat pores in which sweat glands are present. So there are three different types of sweat glands which is present in a human body: ecrinal gland, apocrinal gland, and apoecrinal glands. So in your fingerprint residues which you find at a crime scene, mostly the ecrinal gland secretions are found. So ecrinal gland is spread throughout your body. Then formation of fingerprint ridge, how the fingerprints are formed. So basically there are two types of ridges which is present, that is primary friction ridges and secondary friction ridges. So when the child is in the mother's womb, that is during the first week of the embryonic development itself, our fingerprint starts developing. So the primary friction ridges starts developing from the first week of the gestation, and the developing happens till the 15th to 16th week of gestation. And during the 16th week of the gestation, what happens? The permanent set of the primary friction ridges occurs. Then during the 15th to 17th week of the gestation, your secondary fingerprint ridges starts developing. So these ridges matures during the 24th week. So once the baby is born, the print doesn't change. So these primary fingerprint ridges and secondary friction ridges are joined together, hold in your dermis layer. Okay, so that is why we also say that fingerprint is not unchangeable. So it doesn't change with the age, because it is rooted to your dermis, and only after a person dies, then only the fingerprint ridges starts decaying. Okay, until that there will be no changes in the ridges formed in the fingerprints. So this is how the ridges of the fingerprints are formed. So next, fingerprints. So fingerprint, as I said, it is one of the important evidence in our criminal justice system which helps in the identification of a culprit or identification of an individual. Okay, so even now we use fingerprint for various biometric purposes for identification. So fingerprints are generally present on the epidermis of the skin. Okay, so since they are on the upper layer of the skin, we also call it as epidermal ridges. Okay, so fingerprints can further be classified. Both fingerprint basically has both individual characteristics as well as class characteristics. So fingerprint, we can classify it based on the patterns present in the print into whorl, loop as well as arch patterns. So next we'll be discussing about the different types of fingerprints. So majorly there are three types of fingerprints: latent fingerprints, patent prints, and plastic prints. So first we'll see what are patent prints. Patent prints are the prints which are visible to your naked eyes. That is, it could be deposited using any dust, ink, or any particle that we can visualize or visually see through our eyes is called as patent fingerprint. So there is no development technique which is required to develop these types of fingerprints. Next comes your latent fingerprints. So latent fingerprints are the prints which are not visible to your naked eyes. That is, these prints we cannot see through our eyes. Okay, so these prints are deposited by the residues of your sweat. So these prints require developing method where we use powder techniques or chemical technique in order to develop the prints and make it visible for examination. Next comes the plastic prints. So these prints are also called as impressed fingerprints. So these prints are formed on the soft surfaces like your soap, ghee, or wax. In these types of surfaces where you will have a depth, that is, these prints are three-dimensional prints. It has length, breadth as well as depth. Okay, so these are the three different types of fingerprints. Then we'll discuss about the different patterns of fingerprints. So there are fingerprints are classified into three different patterns based on certain components of fingerprints. So fingerprints are basically made up of pattern area, type line, delta, and code. So what is pattern area? So pattern area is the area in which the prints are present. Okay, and then comes your type line. Type line, it covers the entire pattern of your fingerprint which is present, or the ridge marks which is present. Then is your delta. Delta is nothing but the bifurcation which is present in a corner of a fingerprint, which helps in the classification of your fingerprint. Okay, then is core. Core is nothing but the center of your fingerprint. Based on these four entities, we will classify fingerprint into three patterns. One is arch, loop, and wall. Okay, so arch pattern. So in arch pattern, the ridges form arch-like shape. As the name suggests, it forms arch shape and it doesn't have any deltas. Okay, so the arch pattern can be further divided into two types. Okay, one is plain arch and the other one is tented arch. Plain arch is nothing but a curved shape which is formed, which doesn't have a delta. Tented arch is like a cone shape. It will have pointed peaks, okay, and it doesn't have delta. So these are the two type of arches. Next is whorl pattern. In whorl pattern, what happens? It has two deltas, and the ridges which starts from one delta and it forms a recurves and it exits to the same delta. Okay, so loop pattern, we can further classify it into two types. One is radial loop and the other one is ulnar loop. So if you see our hand, so the bone which is present towards your little finger is called as your ulnar bone, and the bone which is present towards your thumb finger is called as radial bone. So based on this bone, we classify loop into two types, that is radial and ulnar. So the loop which is formed, if it is in the direction of your thumb finger, then we call it as radial loop. And the loop form, if it is in the direction of your little finger, we call it as ulnar loop. Okay, so these are the two types of loop. Then is your whorl pattern. So whorl pattern can further be divided into two types. One is your plain whorl and the other one is your composite whorl. Plain whorl basically has two deltas. Okay, and basically whorl pattern, it forms circular, ovular or spiral. They form spiral shape. Okay, so they have two deltas. So composite whorl can be further divided into three types: accidental whorl, double loop, and central pocketed loop. So central pocketed loop, it forms pocket in the center where it has two deltas and it appears like a peacock shape in the center. So that is your central pocketed loop. Your double loop has two loops which is joined together with two deltas. So double loop can be further divided into two types. One is your twin loop and the other one is your lateral pocketed loop. So in twin loop, what happens? Both the loop will end in two different directions. So the starting point of the loop will be from one delta and the ending point will be in the other delta. Whereas in lateral pocketed loop, the starting point of both the loop and the ending point of both the loop will be in the same direction. So that is a major difference between twin loop and lateral pocketed loop. The other type is your accidental loop. So accidental loop, here you have more than three delta, or it is the combination of the other pattern which I mentioned, that it could be radial, ulnar, whorl, composite. Any of these patterns combination will come under your accidental loops. So these are the different types of fingerprint patterns. Then now let us see what is fingerprint rich characteristic. So fingerprint rich characteristics is also called as minutiae. So basically these are formed when the ridge has some interruption or breakage in the ridges. Okay, so they form minutiae. So these are small features which plays a major part in the examination of fingerprint, where the identification of fingerprint is done mainly on the basis of minutiae present in a finger. So the minutiae during the classification or during the analysis of two samples, what we do is we'll see minimum 8 minutiae if it matches. If we are taking S1 and S2 as the sample, if S1 and S2 has 8 similar minutiae, then it is said that it is of a same person. Okay, so minutiae, and there are different types of minutiae based on the shape and how they are formed. We classify it into different types, that is bifurcation, trifurcation, ridge ending, enclosures, intersection, crossover, spur, hook, etc. Okay, so these are the rich characteristics. Next is the principles of fingerprints. So we say fingerprints are very much used in the identification of an individual. That is because of three major characteristics. One, that is fingerprint is unique. Okay, the second one is that fingerprint does not change with time. The third one is fingerprint is classifiable, and these are the principles of fingerprint also. Okay, so the first principle, as we said, that is fingerprint is unique, because it is said that no two finger of an individual or no two person will have same fingerprint patterns in their hands. Okay, that is why we call it as unique. And fingerprint does not change throughout its lifespan. That is, unless that person dies, after the body undergoes decomposition, only the fingerprint patterns will decay. Okay, until that there will be no changes in the patterns which will be seen. Okay, which plays a major role in identification. And the third one is fingerprint is classifiable. So we can easily classify fingerprint based on its individual and class characteristics. Okay, so these are the major principles of fingerprint. Next, we'll see what are the function of these fingerprint ridges. So why are these fingerprint ridges present in your hand, toes, ears, etc.? So these ridges are mainly present because it provides grip or firmness to your hand. So the way you stand. Okay, if imagine that you don't have a ridge and your skin is very delicate, so there are chances that you skid. Okay, so basically the major function of your fingerprint ridges is providing grip. Okay, in forensic it is used for the identification of an individual. Next, let us see what are the different classification of fingerprints. So fingerprints has been classified into 7 different types based on Henry. So Henry is the scientist who told that fingerprint can be classifiable, and Henry's classification system is also called as 10-digit classification system of fingerprints. Okay, Henry, along with 2 Indian scientists, that is Azizul Haqi and Hem Chandra Bose. These were 2 police officers when Henry was a police commander in Bengal. When he was working, he introduced this system along with the help of these 2 people. Okay, so Henry's classification system is also called as 10-digit classification system. So this classification system can be further divided into 7 types: primary classification, secondary classification, major classification, sub-secondary classification, key classification, and final classification. So these are the 7 different types of classification. So in primary classification, what Henry does is the 10 fingers, we have 10 fingers. So from your right thumb to the left later, that is he gives value for each fingers which has whorl pattern. Okay, so the value is assigned for whorl pattern, whereas for loop pattern the value is considered as 0. Okay, so here the ratio of the number of fingers, that is right finger plus 1 divided by the left finger plus 1 is the formula used to perform your primary classification. So here in the numerator you have the fingers from your right hand, and in the denominator you have the fingers from your left hand, and you had plus 1 for both. Okay, so here the classification, the possibilities of classifying fingerprint is from 1 by 1 to 32 by 32. So the probability of classifying fingerprints is 1024 times. Okay, in between these variations. Okay, even now in the law enforcement agencies and the fingerprint bureau, Henry's classification of fingerprint is used. Okay, so this is your primary classification. Next comes your secondary classification. So in secondary classification, it is done only for your index finger, that is your right index as well as your left index. Here are fingerprint patterns, that is your arch, whorl, loop, all these are given alphabets. Like for example, arch is given as A, loop, that is radial loop, is written as R, ulnar loop is written as U, accidental loops are given as X. Composite patterns, in that you have twin loop is given as T, and lateral pocketed loop it is given as L, central pocketed loop is given as C, plain whorl is given as W. So for each patterns there are alphabets which has been assigned. So in this classification he classifies fingers on the index, that is right index by left index. based on the patterns. Okay, they'll give the alphabetical order. For example, if it is in right index, it is ulnar loop, and in left index it is radial, then it will be L by R. So that is your secondary classification. Then comes your sub-secondary classification. In sub-secondary classification, your index finger, middle finger, as well as your ring finger. This classification is for these three fingers. Okay, so this sub-secondary classification is not done for arch patterns. It is done for whirl as well as your loop patterns. Here what happens is rich counting and rich tracing is done. So in case of loop, we do rich counting. Okay, in case of whirl patterns, we do rich tracing. So here, if there is a loop which is present, we will convert the rich counting into rich tracing. Okay, based on certain values which is given by entry, we classify it into inner, outer or meeting. Okay, if two deltas, if it directly meets, it is called as meeting. If the delta is 3 rich above the delta, then it is inner, and if it is below the delta line, it is considered as outer. So these are the three numbers which we give for the fingerprint patterns according to sub-secondary classification. Then comes your major classification system. In major classification system, we do classify only for thumbprints, that is right thumb and left thumb. Here also we either do rich counting or rich tracing. Okay, next comes your final classification system. Final classification system is done for little finger, only your little finger, that is your right little as well as left little. Right and left little is named as 5 and 10. So you do it for 5th and 10th digit of your fingers. Okay, so here rich counting is done in order to classify the fingerprints into inner, outer or middle. Okay, next comes your key classification. Key classification is only done for your right thumb prints. Okay, so these are the different classification system according to Henry's classification. Next, we'll see what is AFIS. AFIS is nothing but Automated Fingerprint Identification System. So AFIS is a biometric database which is used to record the fingerprints of the people. So it is a collection of database which has mainly criminals profile, that is criminals fingerprint profiles is present inside the AFIS. So the major function of AFIS is it obtains, it stores, it analyzes and gives report about the fingerprints which is present in the database. So what, for example, I am taking a fingerprint from a crime scene and I want to check whether if I can find the match with any habitual offender which is already present in the database. So what do? I'll take this fingerprint, I scan it. There's a scanner from which the prints are scanned, and then the comparison of print is done. So the system will automatically scan for the databases. If it finds any fingerprint which matches this, then it will give the report. Okay, so in AFIS is mainly used by your law enforcement agencies, mainly for the identification of the suspect or for linking the suspect to a particular unsolved crime. So these are the major function of AFIS. Okay, so AFIS was first introduced by a Federal Bureau of Investigation, America. Okay, so here what happens, the prints which are being collected are both your prints, your latent prints as well as your 10-digit classified prints. So your 10-digit classified prints are collected by rollers. Okay, there is ink which is applied in the hands of the individual, and with the help of the rollers, the prints are taken of all your 10 fingers. Okay, your 10 fingers are also taken and your palm prints are also completely taken in your 10-digit classification system. And in latent prints, these prints are the prints which has been obtained from a crime scene. Okay, that could be only of one thumb finger or one little finger, or it could be from any other finger. Okay, so these databases are stored separately. There are two systems in AFIS. Okay, one is for this 10-digit classification system and the other one is for your latent print. Okay, when you enter a print or when you scan a print and when you analyze whether it matches to some of the habitual offenders, the databases checks both your latent prints as well as your 10-digit classification to see whether there is any match or not. Okay, based on this, the IFS will give you the report of the fingerprints. So these are the topics which we have covered in the first unit. Thank you.